I stood at the edge of my farm, fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms, watching in disbelief as Karen's shiny red SUV sank deeper and deeper into the mud like a ship caught in a whirlpool. She screeched into her phone, her high heels sinking alongside her dignity, blaming some idiot for her disaster. Some idiot being me, the actual owner of the land she had been trespassing on for months. The engine roared, tires spun helplessly, and the sight was so pathetic and ridiculous that if I wasn't so furious, I might have laughed. But this wasn't just about a stuck car. This was the final straw after months of blatant disrespect, and today Karen was about to learn the kind of lesson that stuck. I took a deep breath of the crisp, rain-soaked air and let the anger settle into a quiet, dangerous calm. Every step I took toward her squelched loudly in the mud, and with each one, memories of the countless times she had ignored my warnings flared hotter. Karen turned, her designer coat flapping as she pointed an accusing, manicured finger at me. "You do something. My car's stuck because of your stupid field," she shrieked, like the laws of nature and property somehow bent around her entitlement. I crossed my arms slowly, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably between us. Then, with a small, tight smile, I said, "Oh, I'm going to do something all right." Her eyes flickered with confusion, not realizing that for once, this was not going to end the way she wanted. It all started a few months ago, a simpler time when I believed a neighborly conversation could solve problems. The first time I noticed tire tracks slicing through my crops, I assumed someone had gotten lost and turned around. I mean, it happens. People make mistakes. But then it happened again and again. Fresh, deep grooves ruining my carefully planted fields every few days. Confused and increasingly irritated, I set up an old trail cam to catch the culprit. And sure enough, there she was, Karen, my brand new neighbor, acting like my farm was her personal driveway. Watching her glossy SUV casually plow across my young corn was like taking a punch to the gut. Still, I stayed calm. I approached her the next evening as she parked like she owned the place, waving my hands and shouting, "Hey, hey, you can't park here." She barely rolled down her window, sunglasses still on despite the dying light, and muttered, "Relax, it's just grass," before rolling it back up and strutting to her house without another glance. Just grass. Those two words burned themselves into my memory. It wasn't grass. It was food. It was months of work. It was my livelihood. Trying to keep things civil, I left a polite note on her windshield. The next morning, I found it crumpled in the dirt, flattened by her tire tracks. Not only had she ignored my request, she'd gone out of her way to show she didn't care. The rage that simmered in my chest was almost enough to make me lose it then and there, but I was raised better than that. I believed in second chances, sometimes even third. Over the next few weeks, I tried everything. Polite conversation, more notes, even a call to the local authorities. The response, "It's a neighborly dispute. Try to work it out yourselves. Work it out with Karen." That was like trying to teach a brick wall to sing opera. One morning, fed up beyond belief, I decided to get a little creative. I found the foulest smelling batch of manure I could locate and spread it thickly over the area she liked to park in. It was so potent that it made my eyes water even from a distance. When Karen's SUV rolled up, the windows shot down halfway and she gagged, practically diving back into her car while screaming, "What is that smell?" Leaning against the fence, I simply smiled and said, "Fertilizer." I watched her speed away, thinking maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. It wasn't. She came back the next day, parking a little further down, avoiding the stink but still trampling over my crop. That's when I realized the truth. Karen wasn't ignorant. She was deliberately disrespectful. And disrespect like that needed a different kind of lesson. Determined to send a clearer message, I bought a big, bold sign. Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. I hammered it into the ground right near her usual spot. The next morning, the sign was on its side, crushed, tire tracks slicing across it as though mocking me. That was it. No more warnings. No more signs. No more manure. I started preparing silently, methodically, waiting for the right moment. And when the weatherman called for heavy rain that Friday night, I smiled wider than I had in weeks. Nature would finally be on my side. Sure enough, the rain came, soaking the fields, turning the ground into a treacherous, squelching trap that even a heavy-duty four-wheel drive would struggle with. But Karen, in her infinite wisdom, didn't hesitate. The next morning, she rolled her SUV right onto the soggy field like she was starring in her own personal soap opera, titled Entitlement Gone Wrong. Now here we were, her car halfway swallowed by the earth, her designer boots caked in mud, her voice rising several octaves as she demanded I fix this immediately. I stared at her for a long moment, then without a word, turned and gave a sharp whistle. The sound echoed across the open land, a sound Karen didn't recognize but one that made her freeze nonetheless. From the barn, the rumble of my old John Deere tractor roared to life, a mechanical beast awakening. Her eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear breaking through her usual mask of arrogance. I climbed into the cab of the tractor, my boots muddy but my heart light, and revved the engine loudly. Karen stumbled back a few steps, arms flailing as she shouted, "What are you doing? Stop, you can't." I leaned out the side window, voice carrying over the din. "You shouldn't have parked on my land, Karen," I said simply. Then slowly, deliberately, I lowered the massive steel claw toward her sinking SUV. Karen's scream cut through the cold morning air, raw and desperate. But this time there would be no more talking, no more warnings. This was just the beginning, and Karen had no idea how much worse it was going to get. The tractor's engine roared as I sat comfortably in the cab, one hand resting lightly on the controls, while Karen flailed her arms like a wild bird trying to take flight. Her red SUV was now so deep in the mud that only the very tops of the wheels were visible, and yet she still thought she could bark demands at me like I was some kind of farmhand waiting for her orders. I watched her with a calm expression, letting her panic boil over while I savored every second. This wasn't just karma. This was justice seasoned with a good helping of irony, and it tasted better than any victory I had ever had before. Karen stumbled closer, nearly losing her balance in the slippery muck, and screamed up at me, "You better fix this or I'm calling the police." I raised an eyebrow, resisting the urge to laugh. Let her call. Let her explain how she had been parking on my private farm against my will for months. Let her tell them how her blatant disregard for property lines had finally landed her in a situation she couldn't yell her way out of. Instead of answering her, I shifted the tractor into gear and drove a slow, lazy circle around her car, the heavy tires churning up even more mud as I went. Karen's face twisted in a mixture of outrage and horror as I stopped a few feet in front of her. I leaned out of the cab and called down to her, my voice carrying easily over the field. "I'll make you a deal, Karen." She narrowed her eyes, suspicious but desperate. "You promise me, right here, right now, that you'll never park on my land again, and I'll pull your car out. If not," I gestured to the deepening rut where her SUV sat like a stranded whale. "Good luck finding a tow truck willing to drive into this mess today." Her mouth opened and closed as she fought an internal battle. Karen was the type who would rather chew glass than admit she was wrong, let alone apologize. She crossed her arms defiantly. "I don't have to promise anything," she snapped. I smiled coldly and revved the tractor engine, letting the metal claw hover dangerously close to her car's roof. The threat wasn't just implied anymore. It was real. She paled visibly, clutching her phone to her chest as if it could shield her from the consequences she had created. "Fine," she spat finally. "Just get it out." I shook my head slowly. "Not good enough. I want to hear you say it, loud and clear." She looked like she might explode from rage, but the mud was still swallowing her precious SUV inch by inch, and reality was closing in fast. Her shoulders slumped. "I promise I won't park here again," she muttered, barely louder than a whisper. I cupped a hand to my ear theatrically. "Sorry, Karen, I didn't catch that. Can you say it a little louder?" Her fists clenched so hard her knuckles turned white, but she forced the words out, louder this time. "I promise I'll never park on your land again." Satisfied, I climbed down from the tractor, moving slowly just to twist the knife a little deeper. I attached a heavy-duty tow chain to the undercarriage of her SUV, taking my time and humming a cheerful tune while Karen glared daggers at me. When everything was secured, I climbed back into the tractor, gave her a mock salute, and started pulling. The engine groaned with effort as the tires fought the mud, but little by little, the SUV started to shift. Mud sucked and clung to it, fighting every inch of progress, but after a few tense minutes, the car finally came free with a wet, disgusting slurp. Karen clapped her hands like a child, beaming as if she had personally orchestrated the rescue. I unhooked the chain, dusted my hands off on my jeans, and walked away without a word. Let her figure out how to get the rest of the mud off her car. I wasn't her servant. As I reached the porch, I turned back just in time to see Karen climb into the driver's seat, shove the key into the ignition, and turn it. The engine coughed once, twice, then died with a pitiful wheeze. Her face morphed from relief to horror in a matter of seconds. She tried again, nothing. Again, still nothing. I leaned casually against the porch railing, enjoying the spectacle. Karen slammed her fists against the steering wheel and screamed in frustration. I called out helpfully, "Sounds like you burned out your starter spinning your wheels all morning." She whipped her head around and glared at me as if I had personally sabotaged her vehicle. "You did this," she shrieked. I couldn't help it. I laughed, a full, hearty laugh that echoed across the muddy fields. "Yeah, Karen," I said between chuckles. "I made it rain, spun your tires, and wrecked your engine. Clearly, I have godlike powers." Karen's friend, a big burly guy she must have called for help, finally arrived, his pickup truck grinding to a halt on the gravel road. He climbed out, took one look at the mud-soaked disaster, and grimaced. "What the hell did you get yourself into?" he muttered under his breath. Karen immediately ran to him, unloading a wild, incoherent rant about how I had set her up, how the mud was my fault, how everything was a conspiracy. He listened for about 10 seconds before holding up a hand. "Enough. Where's the tow truck?" Karen's face crumpled. "None will come," she admitted through gritted teeth. The guy rubbed his chin thoughtfully, then shrugged. "Fine. I'll pull it out myself." I smirked, already predicting the outcome. This was going to be better than any Saturday night TV drama. He backed his pickup up to Karen's SUV, tied a towel strap between the two vehicles, and climbed back into his truck. "Stand back," he yelled out the window. Karen clapped her hands again, looking like a kid at a parade. The pickup's tires spun, mud flew everywhere, and the rope snapped with a loud pop, sending the pickup lurching sideways. Karen shrieked as mud splattered across her coat and boots. The big guy cursed loudly, slamming his fists on the dashboard. He got out, covered in mud, and glared at the SUV like it had personally betrayed him. Karen ran up to him, yelling and pointing at me again, as if that would somehow change reality. I shrugged innocently, arms crossed, loving every second. "You got a better idea, smart guy." The burly man barked at me. I pushed off the railing and started walking back toward my house. "I do, actually," I said over my shoulder. But Karen would rather chew nails than ask for help nicely. Karen's furious shout followed me, but I didn't stop. I had played my part. The rest was up to her. And somehow, I knew the show wasn't over yet. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat without throwing one last tantrum, and I was already looking forward to seeing just how badly she would lose. I had barely made it to my porch when I heard the inevitable sound of Karen stomping after me, her expensive boots making a ridiculous squelching noise with every furious step she took through the mud. She was fuming, her face an alarming shade of red that matched the still stranded SUV behind her. I kept my back turned, pretending to admire the slowly clearing sky as she ranted and raved, each word sharper and louder than the last. "You can't just leave me like this," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain of her outrage. "You did this to me. You owe me." I took a slow step from my coffee mug, savoring the way her words bounced off me like raindrops off a tin roof. The sheer audacity of Karen thinking she could blame her bad decisions on me was almost impressive in its stupidity. When she realized I wasn't going to respond to her tantrum, she turned on her heel and stomped back toward her friend, who was wiping mud off his jeans and muttering curses under his breath. I watched from a distance as Karen gestured wildly, explaining something with frantic hand motions. Her friend clearly wanted no part of it anymore. He kept shaking his head, pointing at his truck, and glancing in my direction like he was seriously weighing whether it was worth getting involved any deeper. After a few minutes of heated arguing, he threw up his hands in defeat and stormed off, leaving Karen standing there alone, mud-covered, furious, and utterly helpless. That's when she did something that almost made me spill my coffee. She turned back to me, head lowered, fists clenched, and in a voice so tight it sounded painful, she mumbled, "Can you help me?" I leaned forward slightly, pretending I didn't hear her. "What was that, Karen?" She looked like she wanted to throw something at me but held herself back, her teeth ground together so hard I could practically hear it from the porch. "Please," she hissed through gritted teeth. "Can you help me get my car out?" I tilted my head, savoring the rare sight of Karen swallowing her pride. Now was that so hard? I said, setting my mug down and walking back toward my tractor at an infuriatingly slow pace. Karen stood stiffly as I climbed back into the cab and restarted the engine, the tractor rumbling back to life with a satisfying growl. I hooked the heavy tow chain back onto her SUV and gave her a small nod. "Here's the deal," I said loudly enough for her to hear over the noise. "After today, you never park on my land again. Not once. Not even for a second." She folded her arms and glared at me, but after a long moment, she muttered, "Fine." I tapped the tractor controls, smirking. "Not good enough. Say it properly, Karen. I want you to say it like you mean it." Her whole body shook with barely contained rage, but she finally yelled, loud enough for the whole countryside to hear, "I will never park on your stupid land again." "Good girl," I called back, laughing to myself. This time I was careful. I eased the tractor forward steadily, slowly pulling her SUV inch by inch toward firmer ground. It took longer than it should have, partly because I was deliberately dragging out her humiliation and partly because I didn't want to risk damaging the vehicle more than it already was. By the time I finally got her car to the edge of the field, Karen was practically vibrating with frustration. I unhooked the chain, gave her a mock salute, and turned back toward my house without another word. But the universe wasn't done with Karen yet. She hopped into her mud-caked SUV, turned the key, and nothing. The engine coughed weakly once, then fell silent. She tried again, and again, the same sad result. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching as she pounded the steering wheel with both fists, her screams of rage muffled slightly by the closed windows. It was beautiful. She flung the door open and stormed back toward me, her boots making wet-sucking sounds with every furious step. "You broke my car," she shrieked. I grinned widely. "Me, Karen?" I said, shaking my head. "You did a fine job breaking it all by yourself. All that spinning and flooring the gas burned out your starter. Classic rookie move." Her face contorted into a mask of pure rage. She looked like she wanted to say something else, something vile, but she couldn't find the words. Instead, she just stood there, fists clenched, breathing like she had just run a marathon. Her friend, having witnessed the whole sad spectacle from the safety of the road, shouted over, "Hey, genius, you might want to call a mechanic." "I ain't towing that piece of junk." With that, he climbed into his truck and peeled away, leaving Karen standing in the mud, abandoned by the one person who had come to save her. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the crushed crops, the ruined mornings, the sheer arrogance she had shown every time she rolled onto my land like she owned it. Sympathy died a quick death. Karen fumbled for her phone, probably scrolling desperately for a tow service willing to brave the muddy mess. Good luck with that, I muttered to myself. It had rained hard for 2 straight days, and no sane tow would risk getting stuck just to save one entitled woman's SUV. As she paced back and forth, shouting into her phone and getting increasingly agitated, I leaned casually against the porch post, sipping my coffee and enjoying the show. The sky was clear now, the sun shining warmly on the soaked earth, turning everything into a glittering, muddy mess. Birds chirped merrily in the trees. It was a perfect day, at least for me. Karen, on the other hand, looked like she was one step away from completely unraveling. And just when I thought things couldn't get any better, a new idea formed in my mind. A way to ensure that Karen never again saw my field as her personal parking lot. It would take some work, some planning, but the thought of seeing the look on her face when she realized what I had done was more than enough motivation. I finished my coffee, set the mug down carefully, and walked back into the house, whistling a tune. Behind me, Karen's screams of frustration echoed across the fields, a sweet, sweet symphony to my ears. This wasn't over. Not yet. I had just begun to teach Karen what it meant to mess with the wrong neighbor. The next morning, the sun rose bright and early, glistening off the soaked fields like a mirror of mischief. I was already up before dawn, my hands busy setting up the final touches of my plan while the world still slept. I had spent half the night preparing, working by the beams of my tractor's headlights and double-checking every knot, every post, every wire. My land had been treated like a public parking lot long enough, and now it was time for Karen to see once and for all that her playground days were over. By the time the first rays of sunlight hit the horizon, a brand new fence stood proudly around the entire section of my property she loved to abuse. Heavy-duty wooden posts driven deep into the ground, thick wires stretched tight, and bright red and white signs hanging every few feet reading private property and no trespassing. I had even taken extra care to make the signs large enough that even someone as willfully ignorant as Karen couldn't possibly pretend she didn't see them. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and leaned against the porch rail waiting. It didn't take long. Just as the neighborhood was beginning to stir, Karen burst out of her front door like a woman possessed. She was still wearing the same mud-stained coat from the day before, her hair wild and her expression murderous. Her eyes locked onto the new fence immediately, and she froze mid-step, her mouth falling open in pure disbelief. She stood there for a moment, probably trying to process what she was seeing, before she unleashed a scream so loud it startled a flock of birds from the trees. "You have got to be kidding me," she shrieked, stomping through the wet grass toward the fence. She reached it and grabbed the wire with both hands, shaking it violently as if sheer force could undo what I had spent all night building. I took a long, slow sip of my coffee and called out sweetly, "Good morning, neighbor." She spun around so fast she almost slipped in the mud, her finger pointing at me like a weapon. "You did this," she shouted, her voice cracking. I nodded casually, like I had just hung up a new wind chime instead of erecting a small fortress. "Yep." Karen's face turned a shade of red so deep it looked painful. "You can't just fence off your land like that," she bellowed. I raised an eyebrow, playing dumb. "My land, Karen. I can do whatever I want with it." She stomped back and forth like a caged animal, huffing and puffing, searching for some way to counter my perfectly legal move. "You think this is funny," she snarled. I shrugged, giving her my best innocent face. "A little." Her nostrils flared like an angry bull's. "This isn't over," she screamed. I smiled warmly. "It is for me." Karen turned and stormed back toward her house, sinking ankle-deep into the mud with every furious step. I could practically see the gears turning in her head, already plotting her next move. And sure enough, about an hour later, a shiny city truck pulled up in front of her house. Out stepped a man in a crisp suit, carrying a clipboard, looking official and annoyed. I shook my head, chuckling to myself. Karen had actually called the city zoning office on me. I stepped off my porch and wandered over, whistling a jaunty tune. The man cleared his throat and said, "Sir, I am with the city zoning office. We receive a complaint about illegal fencing on your property." I nodded pleasantly. "Of course you did." Karen stood behind him, arms crossed, her grin so smug it could have powered a small town. He continued, "I'll just need to confirm if you have the proper permits." I smiled, taking my time. "Why, yes, I do. Give me 1 second." I turned around and strolled leisurely back to the house, enjoying the way Karen's smile faltered with every step I took. When I returned, I was carrying a thick, neatly organized folder, which I handed over to the zoning officer. He flipped through the papers, his expression growing more neutral with every page. After a few minutes, he closed the folder and looked up. "He's in full compliance," he said flatly. Karen's mouth dropped open like a fish gasping for air. "What?" she sputtered. The officer handed the folder back to me and nodded. "Sorry for the inconvenience, sir. Have a nice day." I tipped an imaginary hat and said, "No trouble at all." Karen watched, horrified, as the zoning officer got back into his truck and drove away, leaving her standing there with nothing but her shattered pride and a rapidly sinking feeling. "You planned this," she accused, pointing a trembling finger at me. I shrugged again. "Maybe." She let out a frustrated scream, spun on her heel, and stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I turned back to my porch, sipping my coffee with a grin so wide it hurt my cheeks. It would have been satisfying enough to end it there, but I knew Karen too well. She wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly, and sure enough, that night, my instincts proved right. Around midnight, I was woken by a faint rustling noise, a sound that didn't belong in the quiet countryside. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped on my boots, stepping silently out the back door. As I rounded the corner of the house, the beam of my flashlight landed squarely on the figure of Karen, hunched over and struggling with a pair of bolt cutters at the new fence. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned at the sheer boldness of it. She was so focused on cutting through the wire that she didn't even notice me. I cleared my throat loudly, and she froze like a guilty child caught stealing cookies. "Well, well, well," I said, my voice low and amused. "What do we have here?" Karen straightened up slowly, her face as pale as the moonlight. I tilted my head, savoring the moment. "Karen, are you trespassing on my land right now?" She dropped the bolt cutters with a loud clatter and bolted for her house without another word. I didn't bother chasing her. I didn't need to. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen, smiling as I reviewed the crystal clear footage from my security cameras. Everything I needed was captured perfectly. Karen had just handed me her downfall on a silver platter, and she didn't even know it yet. As I walked back toward my porch, the cool night air buzzing with the thrill of impending victory, I could already picture the look on Karen's face when the police showed up at her door the next morning. She thought she could treat my farm like it was her personal playground, but now the game was over, and this time there would be no begging, no deals, and no more second chances. Tomorrow, Karen would learn a lesson she would never forget. The morning air was crisp, carrying the sweet scent of damp earth and the quiet satisfaction of justice about to be served. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the sunrise stretch its warm fingers across the muddy fields that had been my battlefield for weeks. Today was different, though. Today, there would be no shoving matches, no tractor theatrics, no desperate pleas. Today, there would be only the cold, clean hammer of consequence falling where it was long overdue. I had barely finished my first cup when I heard the low rumble of a sheriff's cruiser making its way up the gravel road toward Karen's house. I set the cup down carefully, walked out onto the porch, and leaned casually against the railing, my arms crossed, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. The cruiser came to a stop with a crunch of gravel, and two deputies stepped out, adjusting their belts and glancing toward my house before striding purposefully toward Karen's front door. I didn't need to follow them. I already knew exactly what was about to happen. I had sent the security footage and first thing that morning, crystal clear video of Karen trespassing and attempting to destroy my legally installed fence. The law was no longer a vague, helpless idea that Karen could ignore. It was here, with badges and paperwork and handcuffs. I could almost feel the tension buzzing in the air as they knocked sharply on her door. For a long moment, there was no answer. Then the door cracked open, and Karen peered out, her hair a mess and her eyes wild with confusion and fear. One of the deputies spoke in a clear, no-nonsense voice. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you regarding an incident of trespassing and property damage reported by your neighbor." Karen's face went through a rapid transformation, confusion, disbelief, rage, and finally panic. "That's a lie," she snapped, stepping fully outside now, arms flailing. "He's setting me up. He's been harassing me for weeks." The second deputy pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. "We have video evidence, ma'am. You were recorded cutting through his fence last night without permission." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "That's not me," she said weakly. "I mean, it's dark. You can't prove anything." I chuckled quietly from my porch. The footage was high definition, with my floodlights illuminating every desperate, guilty second of her nighttime sabotage. The deputies were unmoved. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," one of them said, pulling out a pair of cuffs. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The sight of those shiny metal handcuffs seemed to snap Karen out of whatever delusion she had been clinging to. She backed up a step, then another, hands raised as if she could somehow push the law away through sheer willpower. "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice rising into a hysterical pitch. "I'm not a criminal. I'm a homeowner." The deputy moved forward calmly, taking her by the wrist and turning her around. "Tell it to the judge, ma'am," he said as he secured the cuffs around her wrists. Karen shrieked again, struggling briefly before realizing it was useless. She was finally, completely, utterly beaten. As they guided her toward the cruiser, she turned her head toward me, her eyes blazing with hatred. "This isn't over," she spat. I smiled, raising my coffee cup in a mock toast. "For you it is." Karen screamed in frustration, but it was drowned out by the sound of the cruiser door slamming shut. The deputies climbed in, the engine rumbled to life, and just like that, Karen was driven away down the gravel road, leaving a trail of dust and the lingering echoes of her downfall behind her. I watched until the cruiser disappeared from sight, then turned back to my house, feeling lighter than I had in months. The weight of constant battles, the endless tension, the helpless rage, all of it lifted, leaving only the peace and satisfaction of farm restored to its rightful quiet dignity. I walked around the perimeter of the new fence, checking each post, running my hand along the taut wire. Everything was intact. Everything was mine again, untrespassed, untouched, respected. It was more than just property lines and fences. It was the principle that mattered, the understanding that you can't walk all over someone's hard work and expect no consequences. Neighbors came out onto their porches, whispering to each other, some casting glances in my direction, others openly giving small nods of approval. Everyone had known about Karen's antics, but no one had wanted to be the one to stand up to her. It felt good to know I hadn't just fought for myself. I had set a boundary for the entire neighborhood. I spent the rest of the morning working the land, repairing a few spots that had been damaged by her SUV, feeling a deep, grounded satisfaction with every swing of the shovel and every seed pressed into the soil. Around noon, as I was leaning against my tractor wiping sweat from my brow, a black tow truck finally rolled up to Karen's house. A mechanic climbed out, scratched his head at the sight of her mud-caked, broken-down SUV, and after a lot of grunting and swearing, managed to haul the sorry vehicle away. I watched with mild amusement as the tow truck disappeared down the road, taking the last physical reminder of Karen's reign of entitlement with it. The days that followed were blissfully quiet. No more tire tracks cutting through my field. No more late-night shouting matches. No more unauthorized parking lots springing up overnight. Just the sounds of the wind moving through the crops, the birds singing, and the occasional distant bark of a dog. I got more work done in a single week than I had in the past 2 months combined. It felt like the land itself was breathing easier, relieved to be free of the chaos. Karen's house sat dark and empty for a while after that. Rumors flew, as they always do in small towns. Some said she had moved back with relatives out of embarrassment. Others whispered about lawsuits and fines stacking up against her name. I didn't really care what the truth was. Karen was gone, and my farm was mine again, and that was all that mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting a golden glow over everything, I sat on the porch with another cup of coffee in hand, watching the fields sway gently in the breeze. A couple of neighbors strolled by, giving me a friendly wave, and I returned it with a nod. Everything felt right, peaceful, whole again. It wasn't just about winning. It was about standing up when it mattered, about defending what was yours against the relentless, entitled push of those who thought the rules didn't apply to them. I leaned back in my chair, stretched my legs out, and let the deep, satisfying silence settle around me. Some people, I thought with a quiet chuckle, have to learn the hard way. And Karen? Well, she learned harder than most. 3 weeks after Karen's arrest, I spotted a moving truck parked outside her house. I watched from my porch as strangers loaded her fancy furniture into the vehicle. No sign of Karen herself, though. The local gossip mill had been working overtime. Apparently, she'd been hit with hefty fines, community service, and a stern warning from the judge about respecting private property. The new neighbors who moved in a week later couldn't have been more different. A quiet couple with 2 young kids who waved enthusiastically whenever they saw me working in the fields. Their first weekend, they walked over with a homemade pie and introduced themselves properly. "We've heard about what happened with the previous owner," the husband said, looking slightly embarrassed. "Just wanted you to know we respect boundaries, and we really respect farmers," his wife added warmly. "Our children should understand where their food comes from." I invited them to visit the farm anytime, even offered to show the kids how to plant seedlings when spring came. As they walked back to their house, carefully sticking to the proper paths, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes justice comes in strange packages. Sometimes it takes a muddy field, a stuck SUV, and one entitled Karen to remind an entire neighborhood what it means to be good neighbors. That night, I slept better than I had in months, with the windows open, the cool breeze carrying the scent of my fields through the house. My land was mine again, and somewhere across town, in whatever cramped apartment she'd been forced to downgrade to, I liked to think Karen was finally learning that the world didn't revolve around her after all.